When I was a grad student, there were times when I had difficulty doing my work, and I was in the library, and I began to pull Yiddish periodicals, magazines, sometimes newspapers off the shelves, and I found them really compelling and interesting. It's not like you're reading a simple words on a page book, but you have this sheet of paper in front of you that has all kinds of different articles and advertisements, illustrations. It's newspaper pages are very active. So that's what initially drew me in. And once I discovered the really incredible content of Yiddish newspapers, I was just amazed and continued reading them. And I really came to love, what they had to offer. It's also, you know, newspapers provide an enormous amount of information. You have them, you have daily newspapers, for example, have multiple pages per day. I mean, there are millions and millions of words to work with, and the information is like really no other place. So, and it also provides information in a different way. It's very immediate. It gives you a sense of what the life of a community is like in a different way than, let's say, a memoir or a book. It's really kind of a compelling resource that I think more people might be willing to use if they were willing to work with something like microfilm, which unfortunately a lot of newspapers are on. Although nowadays the National Library of Israel has put a lot of Yiddish and Hebrew periodicals online, so that's also a possibility. But it's still it's not the easiest format. But still, the data involved is phenomenal. So it makes it worth the effort. The materials I used were either in, and there are a variety of places. YIVO, of course, has probably the largest collection of Yiddish periodicals, newspapers, magazines, things like that. New York Public Library also has an excellent collection of things like, newspapers. The National Library of Israel has a phenomenal collection of Old Hebrew and Yiddish newspapers. So, generally it's libraries. You don't find, Yiddish newspapers and magazines in private collections, or people, that's not something people have hanging around their house, although it depends who you are. What's interesting about those two chapters is that I didn't use material from the Yiddish Press, but I came to those topics through the Yiddish Press. So one of them is on an abortionist who accidentally kills a patient and then doesn't know what to do with the bodies. So he packs it in a trunk and tries to mail it to Chicago and fails miserably. That I discovered that story because of subsequent stories in the Yiddish Press about sort of Jews gone wrong, Jewish criminals, things like that. It mentioned that. It mentioned this particular incident in passing, and so that's how I found out about it. But I used, it took place in New York, and I used, New York newspapers, that were available, from that period. The other article that doesn't really use the Yiddish Press is on Blimp Levy, a Jewish professional wrestler from the 30s and 40s. I also got to that via the Yiddish Press, and that started in the Warsaw Yiddish Press, where I discovered a lot of information on Jewish professional wrestlers in Poland before World War II. There was a link between Jewish professional wrestlers, or really professional wrestlers in general, in Eastern Europe and in New York, and that link was a man by the name of Yankiv Pfeffer, or Jack Pfeffer, who was a manager and promoter who gained fame by importing freakish wrestlers from the world over to the United States. And he had a stable of Jewish wrestlers, some of whom came from Poland. And with this linkage between Poland and the United States, I managed to find out about Blimp Levy, and he was such a compelling character that I couldn't resist writing about him. And unfortunately, I never found anything in the Yiddish Press about him specifically, although, the Yiddish press is a sea of information, and it's really impossible to find everything. So I think that eventually I'll come across something that has to do with him in Yiddish.
Yeah.
And he was the child of Yiddish-speaking immigrants. He himself spoke Yiddish. I'm in contact with a niece of his, and Yiddish was very much a part of his life. So it's that it's sort of the whole Yiddish context that I'm interested in. And if I wasn't able to find anything in the Yiddish press, and I still wanted to write about something, it was still in that world, and I felt it was relevant enough to keep in there. The way that the Yiddish press works is that it changes in different places at different times. So the modern Yiddish press begins in the 1860s in Odessa, and the first Yiddish newspaper there appears in 1862. It's called Kol Mavasar. It has to appear as a supplement to a Hebrew newspaper because it's not technically legal to publish a Yiddish paper. But the man who's running both papers, the Hebrew and the Yiddish, his sort of goal is to educate the common people. And he can't do that in Hebrew because your average Jewish person doesn't know Hebrew. They just they know it to use it for prayer, but they're not able to converse in it. They're not able to read newspaper articles in it. Their vernacular is Yiddish. So he begins publishing this newspaper in Yiddish, and it's a huge hit. And there is news in it. So, for example, the very first issue front page article is about the American Civil War. And it's a really kind of interesting look at how Eastern European Jews in the 1860s, this is, 20 years before the mass emigration begins, how do they perceive America? What do they know about it? And what's interesting is they come right out and say, there's this new country, America. We don't really know much about it. It's called a republic. They don't have a king, and it's run by businessmen. Now, apparently, it's still run by businessmen. I don't know how well it's working out. Not that well. But what's it's interesting that they that they're willing to sort of say what they know, and they talk about slavery and how that's an enormous problem, and how Africans are being exploited, and that the North is fighting the South over it, and their basic take is this country seems to have a lot of promise, but they should solve this problem, and so there is news in this paper. But the bulk of it is really, articles on history and science and literature. So one of the things that this newspaper does is it serializes Yiddish literature. And this is in a way the birth of modern Yiddish literature. Writers like Mendele Moicher Sforim, whose real name is Sholem Yankev Abramovich, Yitzchak Yoel Linetsky, these writers begin publishing in this newspaper called Mavasar, and it becomes a huge hit. Readers love these, novels and installments that they get every week. They're incredibly popular, and it becomes this really new literary forum for Jewish readers. And it's, the Yiddish press, in a way, births modern Yiddish literature. Without the press, it's, Yiddish literature would have ended up as something else. It's not clear what, but not really the same thing. You have this newspaper called Mavasar that's coming out of Odessa. It publishes from 1862 to 1873, and then what happens is the publisher leaves for St. Petersburg. Actually, he really leaves in 1869, and they don't allow him to take the Yiddish paper with him. He does take the Hebrew paper. That's permissible because that's sort of a prestige publication. Hebrew is a prestige language. Yiddish is not. And the Yiddish paper stays in Odessa, left with the printer, who kind of lets the whole thing fall apart in about 2.5 years, and then it disappears. Around the same time, or sort of around the same time in the United States, the first Yiddish newspaper begins publication, and that starts in 1870. A newspaper called the Yiddish Deutsche Zeitung. sort of Jewish German newspaper. It's not really German, it's sort of Germanized Yiddish. That begins appearing, and it's a handwritten and lithographed paper, which is unusual because they could have used Hebrew type, but I think they say that Hebrew type wasn't available. The reality is, I think it was, but the publisher of this paper was too cheap to use it. He would have had to pay. So it was easier just to write it out and lithograph the thing. And he did this for about 5 or 6 years, before the paper went out of business. Whereas at the same time, and this is one of the interesting aspects of the Yiddish press, and I think this happens with other presses as well, but it's especially prevalent in Yiddish, is when someone puts out a newspaper, invariably there's someone that says, this newspaper's terrible. I can do a much better job. And so they begin publishing a newspaper. So a year after the Yiddish Deutsche Zeitung comes out, in 1871, someone starts publishing a new Yiddish paper. And it goes from there. You get in the early 1870s, even before this mass wave of emigration, or immigration to the United States, you have a bunch of little Yiddish newspapers that kind of rise and fall. Most of them fail, but they're attempts to get into this kind of new media game that would have influence on later attempts to do it. After that, after the 1880s in America, you have a much larger critical mass of Yiddish readers for whom you can publish a newspaper. So as the 1880s, 1890s go on, you have numerous attempts at newspapers. You have much more solid papers. First, you have the Yiddish Gazette, which is a weekly. Then you have Yiddisches Tageblatt, which comes out, I think, beginning in 1884. And a number of other papers in the 1890s. A number of socialist papers come out. An anarchist paper starts coming out. By the first decade of the 20th century, you have, I think already by, let's say, 1904, you have 3 daily newspapers in Yiddish in New York. And by the early 20s, you have 5. This is a population that's growing by leaps and bounds. Between 1881 and 1924, 2 million Jews come to the United States, most of them settling in and around New York, and this creates an enormous opportunity for Yiddish publishers. Obviously also other realms of Yiddish culture fall into this, like Yiddish theater, but because newspapers and magazines are the only form of media, they dominate. And so you get publications from every organization under the sun. Every organization that exists, publishes something, because this is media. This is what's available. So you wind up with, magazines for Yiddish hat makers, magazines for, people who run laundries. This is in addition to the regular press. You have poetry magazines, sports magazines, women's magazines, anything you could think of, winds up existing in Yiddish. There's a vegetarian monthly that starts in the 1920s. There's a huge variety of different publications that appear in Yiddish. Now, if we go back to the Russian Empire, another Yiddish weekly begins appearing in 1881, which runs to 1889, and it's sort of a literary-oriented weekly. The Russian government didn't want to promote periodicals or regular publications among Jewish readers, and so they didn't give permission to people to publish them. So you wind up with very little for what's really the largest Yiddish-speaking audience in the world. This is, kind of one of the ironies. The Yiddish press gets going in America much earlier than it does in the Russian Empire, and you have a much more significant population in the latter. But by the time of by 1903, the Russian government allows the first Yiddish daily to begin appearing out of St. Petersburg. It's called Der Freund, and they allow it because the underground socialist press in Yiddish has become extremely popular. and they want something that will that will take people's attention away from that. So they think if they publish a Yiddish daily, that's readily available, that people will read the underground socialist press less. It's not really clear if that was the case or not. But it was a relatively popular newspaper. When that newspaper started in St. Petersburg and eventually moved to Warsaw. And Warsaw really was the main cultural center for Yiddish-speaking Jews. And there were a couple of attempts in 1904, 1905 to publish more newspapers in Yiddish in Warsaw. But it's really in 1908 when a newspaper called Heint begins publication. Heint means today. This becomes the largest and most significant Yiddish daily newspaper in Poland. And obviously independent Poland doesn't exist until after World War I. You also get a number of other Yiddish papers. One of them is Moment, that starts in 1911. And that also continues. That was also a very popular paper in independent Poland during the 1920s and 30s. In addition to that, at the same time, you get a phenomenon similar to what you have in America, where you have dozens and dozens of different publications in Yiddish for all kinds of different organizations and all kinds of different topics, whether it's film or sports or women or politics or anything you can think of. Like everyone, every group from the anarchists to the ultra-Orthodox published something, and you can find myriad different perspectives in this press. So the Yiddish press had, like a lot of presses, had funny pages and humor pages. Humorous stories were were pretty common. And the stories are an aspect of Yiddish literature in general. There were also very tragic stories. The Yiddish press has everything. It's not just humorous, but there are certain aspects to the Yiddish press that have sort of a humorous tilt, which is a little bit unusual. And part of it has to do with the fact that the Yiddish press was kind of a private conversation. People who didn't know Yiddish didn't read the Yiddish press. And so Jews, as a kind of cultural minority, could use the Yiddish press to pretty much say whatever they wanted without much repercussion. Now, obviously, this doesn't work so much in the Russian Empire, where this press is censored and restricted, but in independent Poland and in the United States and in a lot of other places like Argentina, South Africa, Australia, or Western Europe, where you also had burgeoning Yiddish presses during the early 20th century, you have an instance, and this is, I think it's more prevalent in Poland than elsewhere, but you have instances where writers will write about things like crime or, local scandals, and they'll write about these events humorously. And just as an example, they'll use diminutives when they talk about an event. They'll mention the people involved, the victims, the perpetrators, whoever it is, and more often than not, they'll start off by listing their names. And this is just this isn't a real example, but let's say someone involved in some crime story's name is Moshe Shapiro. They'll mention Moshe Shapiro was caught picking the pocket of so and so, and then as they continue to tell the story, they'll start calling him Moishele, which is cute and funny, but also very unusual in the realm of journalism. It's not that's not typically done, and what it reveals is a kind of intimacy that exists in the Yiddish press that may not exist elsewhere. You find this really quite a lot in Warsaw, in the Warsaw Yiddish papers, where the journalists will even sometimes make fun of people involved in some sort of terrible episode, and it's a type of moralizing. They use the articles in a way of trying to tell people how not to behave, And in a way, they make them funny that they make them funny in ways that you may not expect. I don't know if that comes through necessarily in translation, but when you read the articles themselves, they can be pretty hilarious.